expands in their stomachs. This causes painful blockages and offers no real nutrition. Protect our wildlife.
Most storms don't begin with thunder. They begin with an absence so subtle that almost nobody notices it. One moment, your garden feels exactly as it always has. A blue jay flashes across the fence with its familiar streak of blue. A northern cardinal settles into the dogwood, catching the first warm light of the morning. Sparrows hop through the grass, turning over tiny leaves with quick, practiced movements. Somewhere near the flowers, a hummingbird hangs effortlessly in the air, its wings dissolving into a soft blur that almost doesn't seem real. And high above them all, a crow watches quietly from the tallest branch, saying nothing at all. The breeze is gentle. The sunlight is steady. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels wrong. But if you stay still for just a few more seconds, something begins to shift. Not in the sky. Not yet. It begins inside the birds. The blue jay leaves first. No alarm call. No sudden burst of panic. Just one smooth flight into a stand of dense oaks beyond the edge of the yard. The crow follows without a sound, lifting from its perch with slow, deliberate wing beats until it disappears beyond the tree line. The cardinal slips silently into the deepest part of the shrubs, where even the morning light struggles to reach. The hummingbird vanishes so quickly you almost wonder if you imagined it. Then the sparrows are gone as well. The garden is still beautiful, but somehow it no longer feels alive. If you're new here, consider subscribing before you leave, because what you're about to discover may forever change the way you watch the birds just outside your window. And this is where the quiet mystery truly begins. Because none of those birds were running from a storm they could already see. They were leaving for something they had somehow sensed long before the rest of us ever looked up. You know the feeling, even if you have never found the words for it. You step outside expecting to hear the familiar chorus that has greeted every morning for as long as you can remember. The gentle chatter in the trees, the soft flutter of wings between the shrubs, the quiet movement that makes a garden feel inhabited rather than simply planted. And then, without warning, something feels different. You pause for a moment. You look around. Nothing obvious has changed. The flowers still sway. The sunlight still rests across the lawn. The air smells the same. Yet something deep inside you whispers that the place is no longer the one you stepped into only seconds ago. Most people dismiss that feeling almost immediately. They tell themselves they are imagining things. Perhaps the birds simply flew somewhere else. Perhaps they will be back in a minute. Life moves quickly, and we have learned to ignore the smallest changes. But every now and then, something makes us stop just a little longer. You notice the empty fence where the blue jay always lands. The branch where the crow had been watching now sways gently with no one upon it. The cardinal has vanished into leaves so still they seem to be holding their breath. Even the hummingbird, whose tiny wings usually hum through the garden like a living heartbeat, has disappeared without leaving the slightest trace. It is not fear you feel. It is something quieter than fear. Something closer to recognition. As though your senses have noticed a conversation taking place around you, one that you cannot quite hear. And what happens next begins to reveal that the birds may have been listening to signals the rest of us have forgotten how to notice. What most people never realize is that the birds were never reacting to the clouds. The clouds are simply the part we can see. Long before the sky darkens, the world around them has already begun to change in ways that are almost invisible to us. Watch a blue jay closely on mornings like this, and you may notice that it does not rush. It pauses for a heartbeat, turns its head as though listening to something beyond ordinary sound, then slips toward the shelter of taller trees. The crow does something different. It leaves its familiar lookout, circles only once, then disappears beyond the edge of the neighborhood with quiet certainty. The cardinal does not climb higher into the open branches where it usually sings. Instead, it moves deeper into evergreen cover where the leaves grow thick enough to soften both wind and light. Even the hummingbird, so fearless around flowers only moments before, abandons the blossoms without hesitation, vanishing toward places you rarely notice. The sparrows gather low, almost melting into tangled shrubs and dense grasses, until they become impossible to follow. None of these movements appear dramatic on their own. If you happen to glance away for only a few seconds, you might never know they occurred at all. Yet together they form a pattern so consistent that many lifelong birdwatchers eventually begin recognizing it without even thinking. It is almost as though the garden quietly changes its rhythm before the weather ever changes its face. And perhaps that is the hidden layer most of us miss. The birds are not waiting for the storm to announce itself. They are responding to whispers carried through the world long before human senses realized there was anything worth hearing. There is a reason these quiet departures have fascinated scientists for generations. Birds do not need to see the storm to know it is coming. Many species are remarkably sensitive to subtle drops in barometric pressure, often responding long before the first dark cloud reaches the horizon. To us, the morning still feels ordinary. To them, the atmosphere itself has already changed. Imagine walking into a familiar room and sensing, without anyone saying a word, that something is different. You may not be able to explain why. Perhaps the air feels heavier. Perhaps the silence lingers a little too long. Birds experience the natural world with that kind of awareness every single day. Researchers have also found that some birds can detect low-frequency sounds traveling across great distances, vibrations produced by approaching weather systems that human ears simply cannot perceive. While your garden still appears peaceful, the landscape around it is already carrying messages through the wind. The blue jay does not need thunder as a warning. The crow does not wait for the first raindrop. The cardinal does not stay until the branches begin to sway. They trust signals that have guided their ancestors for countless generations, long before weather forecasts or satellite images ever existed. There is something quietly humbling about that. The garden you thought had suddenly become empty is, in reality, responding to information that has been present all along. Whether you see it through the lens of science or simply through careful observation, the feeling remains the same. Nature rarely shouts first. It almost always whispers. And those small feathered lives seem to have learned, over thousands of years, that the softest whisper is often the one most worth listening to. Perhaps this is why certain gardens never feel like collections of plants alone. After enough quiet mornings, they begin to feel familiar to the birds in ways we rarely stop to appreciate. The blue jay always chooses the same weathered fence before disappearing into the trees. The crow returns to the highest branch, not because it is the tallest, but because it offers the widest view of everything below. The cardinal slips through the same evergreen opening so gracefully that the leaves barely move behind it. The hummingbird pauses beside the very flower that catches the first rays of sunlight each morning, hovering for only a second before continuing its invisible routine. Even the sparrows seem to know every patch of grass, every sheltered corner beneath the shrubs, as though the garden exists in their memory as clearly as your own home exists in yours. If you have watched the same backyard through changing seasons, you have probably noticed these patterns without realizing you were collecting them. A branch that is never empty for long. A familiar tram silhouette arriving just after sunrise. A tiny flutter outside the kitchen window while the coffee is still warm in your hands. These moments seem ordinary because they happen so often. Yet repetition has a quiet way of creating trust. Without speaking a single word, the birds become part of your daily rhythm, and you become part of theirs. Then, on mornings like this, when every familiar place suddenly stands empty, the absence feels unexpectedly personal. It is almost as though someone quietly stepped out of a conversation before you realized you had been included in it. And once you notice that feeling, it becomes difficult to believe the birds were simply passing through. They had been sharing the same living landscape with you all along, reading it with a patience that most of us no longer remember how to keep. Then, almost without realizing it, you begin to notice something even stranger. The silence is no longer coming from a single garden. It stretches beyond your fence, beyond the neighboring yards, across the line of maple trees at the end of the street. The places that only minutes ago seemed stitched together by birdsong now feel connected by the same quiet pause. Even the wind seems reluctant to move. Leaves that danced so easily a short while ago now barely tremble. The air feels heavier, not enough for you to measure it, only enough to make you slow your steps without knowing why. This is the moment many lifelong birdwatchers remember most clearly. Not the rain that eventually falls, not the distant roll of thunder, but the unusual stillness that arrives beforehand, as though the landscape itself has taken a slow, patient breath. It is easy to think the birds have disappeared. In truth, they have only become invisible, hidden inside dense evergreens, tucked beneath layered branches, resting against sheltered trunks. They wait with remarkable calm. Nothing about their behavior suggests panic. It suggests preparation. They are not escaping the world around them. They are moving deeper into it, trusting places they have learned through countless changing seasons. Standing alone in the garden, you suddenly realize how much of nature exists just beyond human attention. The world has not become empty at all. It has simply shifted into a quieter rhythm, one that reveals itself only to those willing to remain still long enough to notice. And perhaps that is the most remarkable part of all. Because if the birds have been responding to hidden signals surrounding them this entire time, the question is no longer where they went. The question is whether something inside us has been sensing those same quiet changes all along, waiting to be remembered. Many people believe that moments like these are about more than weather. Not because the birds possess some mysterious power beyond nature, but because they remain deeply connected to rhythms that most of us have gradually stopped noticing. There is something about that idea that feels difficult to ignore. Think about the times you have found yourself slowing down for no obvious reason. The afternoons when you suddenly felt the urge to leave the trail and head home. The mornings when everything appeared perfectly normal, yet something inside you quietly insisted that the day felt different. Most of us explain those moments away. We call them coincidence, imagination, or simple mood. Yet psychologists often describe intuition as the mind recognizing patterns long before conscious thought catches up. It is not magic. It is quiet perception working beneath awareness. Perhaps that is why these silent gardens stay with us. The birds remind us that paying attention is not the same as being afraid. It is simply another way of belonging to the world around us. Whether you see their behavior through science, instinct, or something more reflective, the feeling remains remarkably similar. They respond without panic because they trust what years of experience have taught them. There is a calm confidence in that, one that feels strangely comforting. Standing there, surrounded by empty branches and motionless leaves, it becomes easier to understand why so many cultures have looked to birds as gentle messengers rather than dramatic omens. Not because they predict the future, but because they notice the present with extraordinary precision. And perhaps the deeper invitation is not to believe that the birds know secrets beyond our reach. Perhaps it is to wonder whether we still carry a quiet instinct of our own, waiting beneath the noise of everyday life, hoping that one day we might remember how to listen. Eventually, the rain arrives. A few scattered drops touch the leaves that only moments ago seemed to be waiting in perfect stillness. The branches begin to sway again. The light softens beneath a blanket of gray, and the familiar sounds of the neighborhood fade behind the gentle rhythm of falling water. Yet what stays with you is not the storm itself. It is everything that happened before it. The quiet departures, the empty fence, the branch where the crow had been watching, the place beside the flowers where the hummingbird had hovered in the morning light. Once you have noticed those small moments, they become impossible to forget. The garden no longer feels silent because it is empty. It feels silent because it is full of lives patiently waiting beyond your sight. There is something deeply reassuring in that thought. The world does not stop simply because you cannot see every part of it. It continues quietly, faithfully, following rhythms that existed long before any of us arrived. Perhaps that is why standing outside after the rain often feels different. The air is cooler. The scent of wet earth rises gently around you. One by one, the birds begin to return. First, a sparrow, then the cardinal, stepping carefully back into the open. The blue jay flashes through the trees once again, and somewhere above, the crow settles onto its familiar branch, as though it had never left at all. Nothing announces their return. There is no grand moment of revelation, only a quiet sense that balance has been restored. And in that ordinary scene, many people discover something unexpected. Not certainty, not proof. Just a gentle reminder that the deepest conversations in nature have always happened in the softest moments, when the world becomes still enough for us to notice. So where were they really going? Not to some distant place hidden beyond the horizon, not escaping in fear. They were returning to the places the natural world had quietly taught them to trust. The blue jay to the shelter of strong branches. The crow to a place where patience mattered more than speed. The cardinal into the deep green cover that had protected generations before it. The hummingbird to a pocket of calm where even the smallest wings could wait safely. The sparrows into the tangled grasses that looked ordinary to us but meant home to them. The answer was never far away. It had always been woven into the landscape itself. Perhaps that is why this story lingers long after the rain has passed. It reminds us that wisdom is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the quiet decision to listen before the world demands your attention. Whether you see these moments through science, through careful observation, or through something more personal, there is a gentle truth that remains. Nature is always speaking. Most of the time, it simply speaks too softly for hurried lives to hear. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. It means more than you probably realize that we were able to share these quiet moments together. If stories like this help you slow down and notice the hidden conversations unfolding just beyond your window, I hope you will subscribe before you leave, because there are still so many remarkable things in the natural world that most of us have never truly stopped to see. Until next time, keep watching the places that seem ordinary, because they rarely are. And maybe, somewhere outside your window tonight, a small feathered life is already listening to something the rest of the world has not noticed yet. Maybe it is only a bird, but somehow, it never feels like only a bird.